About 2 years back, I was driving for a rideshare app full-time, working mostly night shifts. I'd always loved those hours. The roads were quieter, traffic moved like water, and I could lose myself in music without passengers trying to make small talk. But that particular night, exhaustion had settled deep into my bones. I'd been on the road for nearly 12 hours straight, and I only accepted that final ride because it lined up perfectly with my route home. The ping came through just after midnight. The pickup location sat along an industrial highway near the 47-kilometer marker, a stretch of road that made my skin prickle even before I arrived. Nothing out there but an abandoned gas station and a factory that had been shut down for years, its windows dark and hollow like empty eye sockets. The app displayed one of those generic names that could belong to anyone, and the profile picture looked old, grainy, like it had been photocopied too many times. But fatigue makes you careless. Makes you ignore those little warning bells. When I pulled up, complete darkness swallowed everything beyond my headlights. Just wild grass swaying in the wind and that oppressive silence that feels like it is waiting for something. I sat there for maybe 30 seconds, my finger hovering over the cancel button, when he appeared, walking slowly along the shoulder of the road. He wore a dark suit that clung to his body like a second skin, completely drenched as if he'd just climbed out of a river. His tie hung crooked against his chest, and his shoes made this wet, squelching sound against the asphalt that seemed too loud in the emptiness. He opened the rear door and slid inside without a word, without even acknowledging my existence. The smell hit me immediately, the thick, musty odor of fabric that's been soaked too long, like clothes left in a washing machine for days. I tried to sound friendly, professional. "Good evening, how are you?" "Where are we headed?" Nothing. He just stared at me through the rearview mirror and pointed forward with one pale finger. The destination was already programmed into the app. Some neighborhood about 20 minutes away, so I figured he just wasn't in the mood for conversation. But something about his eyes wouldn't let me settle into the drive. They were fixed, unblinking. His face, the color of old newspaper. His hair plastered against his forehead in dark streaks. Every time I glanced up at that mirror, there he was, watching me with an intensity that made my stomach turn, like he was waiting for me to understand something, to remember something I'd forgotten. About 5 minutes into the ride, the GPS started acting possessed. The route had been straightforward, but suddenly the map began spinning on its own, redirecting me toward a secondary road that didn't have a single streetlight. At first, I blamed it on signal problems. That area was notorious for dead zones, but the app recalculated 3 times in rapid succession, each time insisting on this new path through the darkness. That's when my passenger raised his hand again and pointed to the right, the exact direction the GPS was showing. I tried to lighten the mood, forcing a laugh. "Ah, so you trust the app more than me, huh?" Not even a flicker of response, just that finger, still extended, still pointing. So, primera, follow. The road narrowed into something barely wider than my car. Eucalyptus trees pressing in from both sides, their branches reaching overhead like skeletal fingers trying to block out the sky. No lights, no houses, no signs of human life, just the sound of my tires on wet pavement. A rhythm that felt like a heartbeat in the silence. And then I noticed something that made my hands tighten on the wheel. The car felt heavier, like I was carrying more weight than one passenger should create. The suspension sagged differently around corners. The engine strained harder on inclines, as if gravity itself had intensified. I looked in the rearview mirror again, and I swear, I saw the outline of another figure in the seat beside him, a shadow darker than the darkness around it. But the window had fogged over, and I couldn't bring myself to reach back and wipe it clear. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to stop, to tell this man to get out, to end this ride right now. Have you ever felt a presence so heavy that it changed the air you breathe? Made your own car feel like it belonged to someone else? What would you do in that moment when your rational mind tells you nothing's wrong, but every cell in your body is preparing to run? When the tension became unbearable, when I couldn't take another second of that suffocating silence, I finally spoke, trying to keep my voice steady. "Sir, I'm going to pull over for a moment to check the tire. Okay?" No response. I eased the car onto the shoulder, put it in park, and turned around to face him. The seat was empty. Completely empty. The engine was still running, the interior light glowing softly, illuminating nothing but wet, upholstery and shadows. No sound of a door opening, no footsteps, no sign that anyone had ever been there at all. Just that damp seat and a gold wedding band lying on the floor mat, catching the light like a tiny piece of fallen sun. Share in the comments a statement beginning with, "I recognize that, ... double quotes." Because when we name the moments that shatter our understanding of reality, we give others permission to acknowledge their own inexplicable experiences. Your words might be the validation someone else desperately needs to know they are not alone in this strange, mysterious world we inhabit. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the steering wheel. I kept searching for the logical explanation, the rational answer that would make this make sense. Maybe he'd slipped out while I was slowing down. Maybe I'd been more distracted than I thought. But it was impossible. The vegetation was thick and tall on both sides, and I would have heard footsteps, would have heard something. I grabbed my phone to call the app support line, and that's when I noticed the ride was still active. The destination remained the same, but the timer kept counting as if my passenger was still sitting right behind me. I canceled it manually, and the system froze, the screen flickering like it couldn't process what I was asking it to do. When it finally loaded again, a message appeared that made my blood run cold. Final destination, 47. That's when headlights appeared behind me. A police truck rolling to a stop, probably thinking I'd broken down. One of the officers stepped out and walked up to my window, asking if everything was all right. I tried to explain what had happened, stumbling over my words because I knew how it would sound, like I'd lost my mind, like I'd been driving too long and imagining things. They searched the car, shined their flashlights across the back seat, and found the ring. One of them picked it up carefully with a gloved hand and said they'd look into it, his expression unreadable in the darkness. Days later, I got a call asking me to come to the station to confirm some details. The officer slid a yellowed file across the desk toward me, dated 1986. Inside was a name I didn't recognize and a photograph that stopped my heart. It was him. They saw me face the same dark suit, the same vacant expression. According to the records, this man had disappeared on that exact stretch of road after an accident on a rainy night. They'd found his car in a creek bed, crushed and empty, but his body was never recovered. I sat there in that sterile room, fluorescent lights humming overhead, trying to find words for something that had no words. The officer watched me with a mixture of sympathy and something else. Maybe belief, maybe recognition that some things in this world can't be explained away. I never drove that route again, and I never worked nights after that. Some roads are meant to stay dark, and some passengers are still trying to find their way home, even decades after they've left this world behind. I walked out of that police station with my head spinning, half convinced this was some elaborate prank or psychological test they were running on me. But the officer's face held no trace of humor, no hint of deception. He was dead serious when he told me that wedding band was part of the belongings that had vanished with the man all those years ago, never recovered from the wreckage, never found in the creek bed where his car had been discovered twisted and empty. I tried to move forward, to continue working like nothing had changed, but I drew a hard line around that region on my mental map, never accepting rides anywhere near the 47-kilometer marker. Sometimes, though, I'd find myself driving past that spot during daylight hours, windows down, radio up, trying to prove to myself that it had all been exhaustion, hallucination, some trick my overtired mind had played on me in the darkness. Then one night, maybe 3 weeks later, I turned the key in the ignition, and the radio flared to life on its own. It wasn't tuned to any station, just static, white noise crackling through the speakers like something trying to break through from another frequency. And then it started, a recording, clear as day. I recognized my own voice immediately, asking if the passenger was comfortable, if he wanted me to crack a window for fresh air. A long, suffocating silence followed, the kind that feels thick enough to touch. And then my voice again, saying words I had no memory of ever speaking. I saw you die here. I slammed my hand on the power button, twisted the volume knob to 0, but the sound kept seeping through, faint but insistent, like it was coming from somewhere deep inside the car's bones. I had to pull over, pop the hood, and rip out the fuse just to make it stop. my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the small piece of plastic. The next morning, I took the car to my mechanic, a guy who'd been working on vehicles since before I was born. He pulled apart the dashboard, traced every wire, examined every connection, and finally looked at me with confusion in his eyes. The sound system's wiring had been burned out for what looked like months, maybe longer. There was no way, absolutely no way, it could have produced any sound at all. Since that day, I've never heard anything strange again, but I stopped working nights completely. Switched to morning shifts, where sunlight keeps the shadows at bay, and every passenger has a face you can see clearly. I don't know if what happened to me was something supernatural, something from beyond the veil between worlds, or if my brain simply fractured under the weight of exhaustion, stress, and bone-deep fear. All I know is that whenever rain falls and I find myself driving anywhere near that stretch of road, the steering wheel feels heavier in my hands, like invisible fingers are trying to turn it, trying to guide me back to that same dark place. And there's one thing I've never told anyone, not the police, not my family, not even myself until this moment. When I looked at that wedding band before the officers arrived, when I held it up to the dim interior light, I saw something engraved on the inside. A woman's name, delicate script worn smooth by decades of wear, followed by the same surname I carry, the same name my grandfather carried before me. What does that mean? But what doors does that open that should perhaps remain closed? Have you ever discovered a connection to something you were running from, only to realize you were always meant to find it? I was born and raised in a small village deep in the interior of Minas Gerais. The kind of place where time moves differently, where change arrives slowly, if it arrives at all. The same dirt roads have guided feet for generations. The same wooden houses lean with familiar wariness. And the same faces grow older year by year, their stories etched deeper into weathered skin. Write in the comments, a reflection beginning with, I commit myself to... Whoa. Because when we declare our intentions to face the mysteries that haunt us, we create a bridge between fear and courage. Your commitment, spoken into existence, becomes a lantern for others still walking in darkness, showing them that acknowledging the unknown is the first step toward understanding it. We've grown accustomed to waking to the neighbor's rooster before any alarm clock could disturb us, to the rhythm of rural life that beats steady and slow, like an ancient heart. And the church bell has always marked the passage of our days, measuring out births and marriages and deaths with its bronze voice echoing across the valley. The church of Snow Bartholomew sits on top of the hill, right at the village's heart, visible from every corner of our small world. From any point below, you can see that iron cross pointing toward heaven like a finger raised in eternal prayer or warning. Nearly everyone in this region was baptized there, married there, or said goodbye to someone they loved there. The church watching over us all like a sentinel that never sleeps. Father Augusto had tended to that church for more than 20 years. He was a reserved man, quiet in his ways, but respected by everyone who knew him. I never heard a single person speak ill of him, not even the ones who'd stopped attending Mass decades ago. Eventos who had lost their faith made a point of greeting him when he passed through the square on his bicycle, his simple black cassack catching the wind, his gentle smile acknowledging each person like they mattered. But one night, everything changed, and the change came like a crack in something we'd all believed was unbreakable. I remember because I woke to the sound of the bell ringing, not the regular chimes that announced 6 o'clock Mass, not the solemn tolling of a funeral, but something irregular, dragging, like someone was pulling the rope, without strength, without purpose, without hope. I looked at the clock on my nightstand, its red numbers glowing in the darkness. It was barely past 2 in the morning. Here, the bell has always been secured with a thick rope that hangs inside the sacristy, accessible only to the priests or the young man who assists during services. So this made no sense at all. My first thought was that someone had broken into the church, or that Father Augusto was suffering some kind of medical emergency and was trying to call for help in the only way he could. I started to get out of bed, already reaching for my clothes, but my wife grabbed my arm and whispered that we should wait for daylight, that whatever was happening could wait a few hours until the sun made things clearer. By morning, the news had spread through every house like smoke. carried on whispered conversations and worried glances. Some people said they'd heard the bell too, that irregular, haunting sound pulling them from sleep. Others claimed they'd seen a faint light flickering in the church windows, like someone had lit candles inside and was moving among them, casting shadows that danced against the stained glass. It was that same day we learned that Father Augusto was no longer alone. A young woman had come from the capital to live in the rooms behind the church, in the small quarters usually reserved for visiting clergy. Her name was Livia. People immediately started talking about her appearance, how pale she looked, how defeated, like someone who'd been fighting a battle no one else could see. Father Augusto explained to those who asked that she was in recovery, that she needed quiet and prayer and distance from whatever life she'd been living before. Some assumed she was a relative, perhaps a niece or distant cousin fallen on hard times. Others whispered that she was a troubled soul, someone who'd been taken in for treatment because she was sick in ways that had nothing to do with the body. Nobody knew exactly what that meant, what kind of sickness required sanctuary in a church rather than a hospital. But Father Augusto had always been private about such matters, and nobody had the courage to press him for details. The following Sunday, there was no mass. The church gate remained locked, and a handwritten notice had been tacked to the heavy wooden door. Father Augusto had written in his careful script that he was suspending all services indefinitely, with no explanation, no timeline for when they might resume. It was the first time in my entire life, in anyone's life here, that the church had gone silent on a Sunday. In the days that followed, the rumors began to multiply and twist like vines growing wild. One of the boys who'd helped the sacristan swore he'd seen Father Augusto dragging something heavy into the church late at night, something wrapped in cloth that he struggled to move. Another claimed to have heard screams, not of pain exactly, but of desperation, of someone pleading for something they knew they wouldn't receive. The strangest part was that during daylight hours, nobody saw the priest leaving the church at all. He only appeared at night, always alone, moving quickly from door to door, like he was afraid of being seen. On Tuesday of that week, I walked up the hill to bring bread to Donna Hilda, an elderly woman whose house sits just below the church grounds, close enough that she can hear the hymns during services. She pulled me inside, her hands trembling as she spoke, telling me that during the previous night she'd heard sounds like furniture being dragged across wooden floors, heavy scraping that went on for hours. And beneath that noise, she heard a voice praying loudly, desperately, as if trying to drown out another voice that was screaming underneath it, fighting to be heard. I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss her concerns, telling her she'd probably dreamed it or heard animals on the roof. But when I walked back down the hill toward home, I looked up at the church windows and noticed something that stopped me cold. Every window had been covered from the inside with dark cloth, heavy fabric that blocked out all light, turning the church into something sealed and secret, like a tomb that wanted to keep its contents hidden from the world outside. Things grew heavier with each passing day, the air itself seeming to thicken with something we could unname, but could all feel pressing down on us. Suro, the blacksmith, who'd maintained the church's doors and iron gates for decades, was summoned by Father Augusto one afternoon. Days later, when he finally spoke about it, his voice carried a tremor I'd never heard before. He told us the priest had asked him to reinforce the sacristy lock to make it stronger than any lock had reason to be, and to install iron bars across the back windows, the kind you'd use to keep people in rather than out. Father Augusto claimed it was for security, but Suraola's tone when he recounted this was not the voice of a man who believed that explanation. It was the voice of someone who'd seen something that violated the natural order. Someone who'd been asked to build a cage and didn't want to know what it was meant to contain. One night around 11, the gravedigger came pounding on my door, his face drained of color, eyes sunken deep like he hadn't slept in days, his whole body shaking as if he'd just climbed out of ice water. He told me Father Augusto had called him and the blacksmith for urgent help with something that could wait until morning. I pressed him for details, asked him what could possibly be so urgent in the middle of the night at a church, but he just shook his head, violently backing away from my door like he was afraid the words themselves might follow him home. All he said was that he'd witnessed something that wasn't right, something that broke the rules of what should be possible in this world, and that he would never set foot on that hill again. Not for any amount of money, not for any promise of salvation. In the following days, the bell fell silent, but the village began to notice a different kind of sound. Something like a low moan emanating from within the church when the wind passed through, as if the building itself had developed a voice and was crying out in pain. Children started avoiding the path that wound up the hill, taking long detours that added 20 minutes to their walks rather than pass within sight of those covered windows. The elderly returned to praying at home, dusting off old rosaries and whispering petitions they hadn't spoken in years. Back then, I still tried to maintain some grip on rationality, telling myself it was just rural superstition. That country, people create stories to explain everything they don't understand. That fear multiplies in small places where everyone knows everyone else's business. But what happened on Friday night shattered any attempt I had at keeping calm, at pretending this was all exaggeration and folklore. It was just after 8 when the power cut out across the village, plunging us into the kind of darkness that makes you remember humans are you and meant to live without fire. This was common enough. Our electrical grid was ancient, held together more by habit than proper maintenance. I sat on my porch with a lantern, its weak glow barely pushing back the night, and I found my eyes drawn up to the hill, to the church silhouette against the slightly lighter sky. And I swear on everything I hold sacred, I saw through the stained glass window a series of flashes, like dozens of candles being lit and extinguished simultaneously, creating patterns that seemed too deliberate to be accidental. The wind sounded fiercer up there, howling around the stone walls. And with each gust I could hear something banging, scraping against wood, like fingernails or claws trying to work their way through. The next morning, the bell rang again, but this time it was a single stroke, heavy and prolonged, reverberating through the valley like a death knell that went on far too long, as if whoever was pulling the rope couldn't let go. Nobody had the courage to climb that hill to investigate. We all just stood in our doorways, looking up, waiting for something we couldn't name. A few hours later, Father Augusto appeared in the square, and the sight of him sent a collective gasp through the gathered crowd. It was fealty, his cassock torn and stained, his face marked with scratches that looked fresh, blood-dried in dark lines down his cheek. But worse than the physical damage was his expression, that distant, haunted look of someone who'd seen into the abyss and couldn't quite find his way back. He asked for the blacksmith and the gravedigger, the same 2 men from that mysterious night. His voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper, and he said only that he needed to contain the evil before it spread beyond the church walls, before it reached down into the village and touched the innocent. Nobody understood what he meant, what kind of evil could be contained by iron bars and locks. But both men went with him anyway, their loyalty to the priest stronger than their fear. They spent the rest of that day inside the church. Occasionally we'd hear hammering, the rattle of chains being secured, and prayers shouted so loud they carried down the hill, desperate invocations that sounded more like battle cries than worship. People began gathering outside the church grounds, forming a worried crowd at the base of the hill, but nobody dared to approach the door, to interrupt whatever ritual or struggle was taking place within those stone walls. When the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of blood and bruise, the gate was locked from the inside. With a heavy chain we could hear rattling. Father Augusto appeared at the sacristy window, his silhouette framed against the dying light, and he spoke just one sentence in a voice so rough it barely sounded human. "If you hear the bell again, pray, but do not come up here." It was the last time anyone saw him alive in public, the last words he spoke to the community he'd served for over 20 years. And those words became a commandment. We would all obey, even as we wondered what we were leaving him alone to face. In the days that followed, the village sank into a strange, oppressive silence, the kind that feels like it's waiting for something terrible to break through. The gravedigger, who'd always joined us for drinks at the bar every Saturday night, vanished completely. His house locked up tight, his tools left scattered in his yard, as if he'd abandoned them and the blacksmith developed fevers so intense they made him delirious, rambling about things that made no sense, speaking of walls that breathed, of metal that screamed when he shaped it, of shadows that moved against the light. A week later, he died in his sleep, his wife finding him cold and stiff with his eyes wide open, staring at something only he could see. His death was the first sign that this wasn't just a spiritual problem, wasn't something that could be solved with prayer and holy water. It was something physical, something that contaminated everyone who came too close, like a disease that spread through proximity to whatever was trapped inside that church. How many times have you felt the weight of secrets pressing down on a place, changing it into something unrecognizable? What happens to a community when fear becomes its daily bread? When the familiar turns foreign? Today, so many years later, I still pass in front of that church when my errands take me up the hill. Sometimes, it stands there still closed, covered in creeping vegetation that's slowly reclaiming the stonework. Vines threading through cracks like veins. But every time heavy rain falls, the wind seems to originate from that place, carrying with it a distant sound of iron striking iron, as if the bell rope is still being pulled by invisible hands that refuse to rest. And when that sound finally stops, the silence that follows feels heavier than normal silence should, weighted with all the unspoken horror that transpired within those walls. Share in the comments your truth, beginning with, I discovered ... double quotes. Because when we name the darkness we've witnessed, we create space for others to speak their own unspeakable experiences. Your discovery might be the key that unlocks someone else's understanding, helping them realize that some places hold memories too terrible to forget but too dangerous to fully remember. I can't explain what happened in that church, can't wrap words around something that defies every natural law I thought governed this world. All I know is that from that night forward, nothing in our village returned to what it had been before. The innocence we'd carried, the simple faith that had sustained generations, was shattered like glass beneath a hammer, and we'd been walking carefully through the shards ever since. What happened after that week was never recorded anywhere official, never made it into any church registry or police report. Here, we don't write things down, don't preserve documents or keep archives. Things survive in memory. In conversations whispered at the general store or on the benches in the square where old men gather to watch the day pass. But there are memories that don't fade, that stay sharp and vivid no matter how many years separate you from them. And this is one of those memories, burned into all of us who lived through it. After the blacksmith's death and the gravedigger's disappearance, Father Augusto became completely reclusive, sealing himself inside the parochial house that sat behind the church. The windows stayed shuttered day and night, and nobody saw Livia anymore, that pale young woman who'd arrived from the capital and started all of this somehow. Some said she'd been taken away in secret, smuggled out in the middle of the night to some institution that could handle whatever afflicted her. Others insisted she was still in there, locked in some interior room, contained by whatever barriers the priest and his helpers had constructed. From time to time, kind-hearted villagers would climb partway up the hill and leave food on the church steps. Bread, cheese, vegetables from their gardens. The next day, the food would be gone, but nobody ever saw who retrieved it, never caught a glimpse of movement behind those darkened windows. I began to notice something strange in the early morning hours. In that deep darkness before dawn when the world feels like it's holding its breath. It wasn't the bell anymore, it was a muffled sound, almost rhythmic, like heavy objects being moved across wooden floors. Sometimes it sounded like church pews being dragged from one place to another, reorganizing the interior for some purpose we couldn't imagine. Other times it was the thud of something massive hitting the ground, shaking the foundation hard enough that I could feel it in my house halfway down the hill. And woven through these sounds were voices. Not the desperate screaming of someone being hurt, but the strained effort of someone trying to restrain another person, to hold them back from something they desperately wanted to do. A deep male voice murmuring prayers or commands, and beneath it a female voice so distorted it barely sounded human, scraped raw from the inside, like vocal cords being dragged across broken glass. Back then, people started talking about possession in hushed tones, but nobody had the courage to use that word at full volume, to speak it into existence where it might take on more power. Father Augusto had always been so respected, so steady and trustworthy, that the idea of him being involved in something so dark seemed absurd, impossible. Even so, nobody approached the church after sunset anymore. The hill became forbidden territory, a place where the rules we'd always lived by no longer applied. One day I ran into Donna Margarita, the woman who'd washed the priest's vestments and linens for as long as anyone could remember, a service she'd performed with pride and devotion. She told me with tears in her eyes that Father Augusto had sent a note asking her to leave his soiled clothes in a basket at the base of the hill and to stop coming up to the parochial house, to stop trying to help him. When she opened the basket later to collect his laundry, she said the clothes came back stained with something dark that wasn't quite blood. Something that left a smell of old iron, like rust that had been scraped from ancient metal and left to oxidize in darkness. In that same note, he He'd requested heavy cloth, thick sheets, and a roll of strong rope. The kind of supplies you'd use to bind something that fought against being bound. That was the first time I felt real fear, the kind that lives in your stomach and never quite leaves the understanding that whatever was happening up there had moved beyond prayer and faith into something far more desperate and physical. It wasn't fear of what was happening inside those walls that paralyzed us. It was fear of the silence that consumed anyone who knew anything. The way knowledge seemed to weigh people down until they walked bent and broken, carrying secrets they couldn't bear to name out loud. People moved through the village like ghosts of themselves, their eyes holding truths, their mouths refused to speak, as if saying the words would make everything more real, more permanent, more inescapable. About 2 weeks after the blacksmith's death, the diocese finally sent a representative. A young priest named Father Renato, who arrived in a dusty car one morning with the confidence of someone who'd never encountered anything his faith could unexplain. He drove straight up to the church, his determination visible even from the square below. And many of us followed behind, keeping our distance, but unable to resist witnessing what would happen next. He asked everyone to remain outside, to give him space to assess the situation properly. And we overhead, forming a worried semicircle at the base of the hill. I remember the harsh sunlight beating down on the stained glass windows, making them glow like they were lit from within, and watching him push hard against the heavy wooden door until it finally gave way. We could hear him calling for Father Augusto, his voice echoing through the empty nave, calling again and again with increasing urgency as only silence answered him back. Not long after, maybe 15 or 20 minutes, he emerged from the church looking like he'd aged a decade in that short time, his face drained of all color, his hands shaking so badly he could barely grasp the door handle. He said he'd heard moaning, low and continuous, but when he searched the entire building, every room and corner, the church was completely empty. No people, no animals, nothing that could have made those sounds. He got back in his car without another word, without offering comfort or explanation, and drove away that same day, leaving us standing there with more questions than we'd started with. We never saw him again, never received any official report about what he'd found or what he'd recommended. That night, the bell rang again. 3 short, sharp strikes that cut through the darkness like knife blades. Then silence, deeper and more oppressive than before. The kind of silence that feels like something holding its breath. The next morning, I found the church gate standing slightly ajar, pushed open just wide enough for a person to slip through. Nobody else had the courage to climb that hill anymore. But curiosity gnawed at me stronger than fear, demanding answers to questions I didn't even know how to ask. I climbed slowly, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them, each step feeling like a betrayal of common sense. Inside, the smell hit me first, mold thick enough to taste, mixed with the acrid scent of burned wax. Decades of candles melted down to nothing. The altar was draped in cloth, covered like furniture in an abandoned house, and the floor bore drag marks. Long scratches in the wood as if something heavy had been pulled from one end of the church to the other, repeatedly carving grooves into the ancient planks. That's when I heard a sound coming from the sacristy, low and rhythmic, almost like breathing but wrong somehow. The intervals too long and too short. Alternately, I thought about leaving, about running back down that hill and never returning, but the sound continued, drawing me forward against every instinct of self-preservation. I moved toward the door and peered through a gap in the warped wood, and what I saw burned itself into my mind so deeply that even now, decades later, I can recall every detail with perfect, horrible clarity. Livia was lying on the floor, her face turned sideways, and Father Augusto knelt beside her, praying in a loud, desperate voice that cracked and broke on certain words. But her body was moving in ways that shouldn't be possible, ways that violated every law of anatomy I understood. Her arms bent backward at angles that would snap bone, folding and unfolding like they contained no skeleton at all, and her chest rose and fell irregularly, as if she were trying to breathe through multiple places at once, air entering and leaving through wounds that weren't visible. But her face, that's what marked me most deeply. What still visits me in nightmares when my guard is down. It wasn't an expression of pain or fear, nothing that would indicate suffering or resistance. Instead, her features were twisted into a kind of forced smile, like invisible hooks had been inserted into her flesh and were pulling the muscles upward with mechanical precision, creating a grotesque parody of joy. And her voice didn't belong to her. Didn't belong to any woman I'd ever heard. It was thick, scraped, raw, speaking things without meaning. Words I couldn't recognize, but that sounded like prayers spoken backward. Holy phrases turned inside out and made profane. Father Augusto, between his recited prayers and invocations, kept saying something that didn't make sense to me at the time. He repeated that this wasn't a presence from outside, wasn't some demon that had traveled here from elsewhere. He said it was the soil itself that was acting, the ground beneath us that was exerting its influence. In that moment, I couldn't understand what he meant, couldn't grasp the implication of his words. But later, much later, after years of thinking about it in the quiet hours before dawn, I wondered if he was talking about the village's own earth, about the ancient cemetery that spread behind the church where we'd buried generations of our dead, where the soil was more bone dust than dirt saturated, with the residue of everyone who'd ever lived and died here. But in that moment, all I could do was back away slowly, carefully, trying not to make any sound that might draw attention to my presence. I ran back to my house, my lungs burning, and told nobody what I'd witnessed. Kept it locked inside, where it festered like an infected wound. 4 days afterward, I tried to act as if nothing had happened, tried to fall back into the rhythms of normal life, but her body wouldn't leave my thoughts. It had looked so empty, so hollow, like what was inside wasn't a person trying to break free, but something else entirely. Something trying to learn how to inhabit human form, practicing the movements and sounds like a child learning to walk. After that, Father Augusto sent a brief message to several residents, delivered by a boy who wouldn't say where the priest had given it to him. The note asked that nobody else come up to the church, said he was completing a ritual of liberation and needed silence and prayer from the village below, needed us to create a spiritual barrier through our faith while he fought whatever battle was taking place in that sacred space. It was the last message he ever sent, the last time we heard from him directly. 2 weeks passed in strange suspension, and gradually the noises ceased, the sounds of struggle and movement fading until the hill was silent again. The village began to breathe easier, but it was the kind of relief that comes not from overcoming something, but from desperately pretending it never happened, from collectively agreeing not to speak of it so that maybe somehow it would become less real. On a rainy night when the world felt washed clean and new, I woke to the sound of the church gate banging against its post in the wind, metal striking stone in an irregular rhythm. I opened my window and saw a single candle burning inside the church, its flame trembling behind the stained glass. A shadow moved slowly across the colored light, and I recognized Father Augusto's silhouette. A was alone wearing his cassock, kneeling in what looked like the center of the nave, and he appeared to be praying aloud, his voice rising and falling like a tide. With each crack of thunder, the candle flame would extinguish completely, plunging the church into darkness. And then it would relight itself, flickering back to life, as if someone were standing beside it with a match, ready to restore the light the instant it failed. The next morning, I found a note left at the door of the general store, weighted down with a small stone, so the wind wouldn't carry it away. It was in Father Augusto's handwriting, that careful script he'd used for decades to write in the parish ledgers. The note said only, "If she is free, someone must remain." Nobody understood what he meant at first, couldn't decipher the logic of that statement, or what sacrifice he was proposing. But it was a harbinger of the end, a final message from a man who'd already made his choice. The following day, the bell rang one last time, the longest, saddest toll I've ever heard. A sound that seemed to carry not just through the valley, but through time itself, mourning everything that had been lost and everything that could never be recovered. And then silence, final and absolute, like a door closing that would never open again. Some men from the village, including the sacristan, and a cousin of mine who'd always been braver than most, finally gathered the courage to climb to the church and see what had happened, to bear witness to whatever conclusion had been reached. Inside, they found the altar covered in melted candles, wax pooled and hardened in strange patterns across the stone, and scorch marks on the floor forming shapes none of them could interpret. Symbols that might have been deliberate, or might have been random. Livia was collapsed beside the pulpit, still alive, but with a distant, vacant stare, not reacting to anything, ... Not to their voices calling her name, not to their hands on her shoulders trying to rouse her, not to the light streaming through the windows. And Father Augusto, they found him kneeling inside the confessional, completely still, His hands burned so badly the skin had blistered and blackened, his eyes open and fixed on the crucifix that hung above the altar. What struck them most was that despite everything, despite the burns and the obvious suffering he'd endured, there was a faint smile on his face, peaceful and resigned, as if he'd finally accomplished what he'd set out to do and could rest now. They carried his body down from the hill, and nobody knew what to say. What words could possibly capture what we'd all been through? The diocese ordered the church sealed permanently, sent official letters saying they would conduct a full investigation into the events, but those investigators never came. Never followed through on their promises. Livia was taken away by distant relatives who arrived from the capital, people none of us had ever met, and they drove away with her sitting silent and motionless in the back seat. Nobody knows what happened to her after that. Some say she eventually recovered, found her way back to herself and built a quiet life somewhere far from here. Others whispered that she died shortly after, that whatever had inhabited her had left her too damaged to survive. I prefer to believe she simply went away and chose never to remember, that she found peace in forgetting, that the blank spaces in her memory became a kind of mercy. But even after everything, after Father Augusta's death and Livia's departure and the official closure of the case, nobody in the village had the courage to enter that church. It remained abandoned, slowly being consumed by vegetation, vines climbing the walls and pushing through cracks in the stone, turning it into something more ruined than building, like an open wound at the village's heart that never quite healed. And even now, so many years later, when most of the people who lived through it have died or moved away, when heavy rain falls and the wind picks up, you can still hear the bell. It rings by itself, slowly, deliberately, as if someone is standing in that tower pulling the rope, as if someone is trying to remember the way back to the living world or trying to remind us of what we witnessed and promised ourselves we'd forget. And every single time I hear it, that same cold runs down my spine, the same fear that gripped me that first night when this all began. Because some things don't fade with time, don't diminish with distance. Some things remain exactly as terrible as they always were. After Father Augusto's death, the church was officially sealed by the diocese. 2 men arrived from the capital dressed in dark suits that made them look more like government officials than church representatives, and they worked quickly and efficiently, wrapping heavy chains around the gate, nailing boards across the main door with long spikes that bit deep into the ancient wood and removing certain objects from the altar. The chalice that had held countless communions, the missal with its ribbon markers and illuminated pages, and the candles that somehow hadn't melted during whatever final ritual had taken place. What would it mean to you to carry a secret so heavy it changes the shape of your life, bending everything around it like gravity around a black hole? Do you believe some places can hold on to darkness, can become vessels for things that should have passed on but chose to remain? Nobody from the village approached to help them with this work. We watched from below, our collective guilt and relief mixing into something we couldn't name, grateful that someone else was taking responsibility for sealing away what we'd all allowed to happen through our silence, our fear, our unwillingness to act when action might have made a difference. Leave in the comments your commitment beginning with, I accept that, ... Because when we acknowledge the weight of what we've witnessed, when we accept the reality of things that defy explanation, we create space for healing. Your acceptance spoken honestly might give someone else permission to stop running from their own inexplicable experiences, to stand still and face what they've been fleeing, to understand that some truths are too large to carry alone and too important to bury forever. It seemed like everyone was desperate to close that chapter, as if boarding up the doors and wrapping chains around the gate would be enough to bury what had transpired within those walls, to seal it away like toxic waste that would remain safely contained as long as nobody disturbed it. For several months, life attempted to return to normal, or at least to the appearance of normal. The bell that had always marked time for the village, that had regulated our days and nights for generations, fell into absolute silence. But that silence, in a strange way that none of us could quite articulate, felt even more disturbing than any sound could have been, like the held breath before something terrible breaks loose. I avoided passing near the hill whenever possible, taking long detours that added time to simple errands. But sometimes there was no choice, no alternative route. The path to the river wound past the church grounds, and every time I climbed that way, I felt the air change, becoming still and heavy, as if the wind itself gave up before reaching that cursed place, as if even the breeze knew better than to disturb what rested there. Vegetation began consuming the stone stairway, weeds pushing up between the steps, vines reaching across like grasping fingers, and the flowers in the garden that Father Augusto had tended so carefully that had bloomed faithfully every spring, for decades died overnight, all of them at once, their petals blackening and falling as if someone had ripped out their roots or poisoned the soil beneath them. Some people said it was just time taking its course, nature reclaiming what had been abandoned, the inevitable decay that follows when human care withdraws. Others spoke in lower voices about how the earth itself was rejecting everything that tried to grow there, how the ground had been contaminated by what it had witnessed, turned sour and hostile to life. A few months later, a group of men decided they needed to open the gate again, needed to verify that the bell was still secured properly, that it couldn't ring on its own. I went with them, driven by a mixture of curiosity and the need to prove to myself that it was all just superstition, just collective hysteria that had gripped us. When they pried away the boards, a powerful smell rushed out from the darkness inside. Not the stench of rot or death, but something older. The smell of ancient mold and cold wax, of air that had been sealed away too long without circulation, stale and thick like breathing inside a tomb. The atmosphere inside was oppressive, weighing on our chests, making it harder to draw full breaths. And the floor was covered in a fine layer of ash gray and soft, though nobody could say what had burned to create it. The bell still hung in its tower, suspended on its massive axle, but the rope had been severed close to where it attached to cut clean and deliberate, as if someone had made absolutely certain it could never be rung again by human hands. Even so, when a gust of wind found its way through the broken windows and gaps in the walls, the bell swayed slightly, just enough to produce a low sound, barely audible, almost a moan of metal against metal that resonated in our bones more than our ears. One of the men dropped his hammer with a clatter that echoed through the empty nave and ran down the hill without explanation, without apology, his footsteps fading into the distance. Nobody laughed at him. Nobody called him a coward, because we all felt it too. That presence, that wrongness, that sense of being watched by something that existed just beyond the edge of our perception. We simply closed everything up again, working quickly and silently, replacing the boards and securing them tighter than before, and walked back to the village without speaking, each of us locked in our own thoughts, our own fears. That was the last time I set foot inside that church, the last time I allowed myself to be that close to whatever remained trapped or lingering within those walls. As years accumulated and stacked upon each other, the place became a curiosity for outsiders, for people from neighboring towns who heard rumors of the bell that rang by itself and wanted to investigate, wanted to experience something paranormal, something that would make good stories at dinner parties. Most of them descended the hill laughing, saying they'd seen nothing, heard nothing, dismissing our village superstitions as the product of isolated, uneducated people who didn't understand the modern world. But some came back down that hill, transformed, their faces drained of color, their voices reduced to whispers or silence, moving like people who'd heard something they knew they shouldn't repeat, who'd glimpsed something that shattered their certainty about how reality works. A young man from the neighboring city even managed to record a sound during one of these visits, capturing it on his phone and playing it back for several residents who gathered around to listen. It wasn't wind howling through broken windows. It wasn't the echo of rain on stone or the creaking of old wood settling. It was a voice, faint but unmistakable, barely more than a whisper, repeating a phrase in Latin over and over, the same words cycling endlessly like a prayer that had lost its meaning but couldn't stop itself. The priest from the city, when someone brought him the recording, listened only once, his expression growing darker with each syllable. He asked quietly that the file be deleted immediately, and that was all he would say, refusing to translate the words or explain what they meant. The years continued their march, and memory began blending with time. The sharp edges of what happened softening slightly, though never disappearing completely. The village grew a bit, gained some new families who had lived through those events, and did carry the same weight we did. They opened a new road that bypassed the hill entirely, and the church became even more forgotten, hidden among trees and ruins swallowed by vegetation that made it look more like an ancient archaeological site than a building that had been in use just years before. Even so, nobody touched it. Not the diocese, not the municipal government, not the faithful who still attended services in the new chapel built on the opposite side of the village. It was as if we'd all made a silent agreement to leave it in peace, to let sleeping things remain sleeping, to not disturb what had finally settled into an uneasy rest. But what makes me write this now? What compels me to put these memories into words after so many years of silence isn't nostalgia or curiosity or the desire to preserve history. It's the weight of knowing that even with time's passage, certain things continue moving, continue existing, continue asserting themselves into our world. We learn to live with the inexplicable the way we live with chronic pain. We adapt, we adjust, we avoid looking directly at it so we don't awaken what has mercifully fallen dormant. A few years ago, during a particularly violent rainstorm that flooded the lower streets and turned the dirt roads to rivers of mud, the bell rang again. And I swear on everything I hold sacred, this time it wasn't the wind, wasn't some natural phenomenon that could be explained away. The sound was crystal clear, deliberate, slow, ... each toll separate and distinct, as if someone were pulling that severed rope with both hands, putting their full weight into each stroke, making absolutely certain the sound would carry across the entire valley. People emerged onto their porches and leaned out windows, some immediately dropping to their knees to pray, others simply standing frozen watching the hill, saying nothing because there was nothing. To say that would make sense of what we were all hearing. The sound spread through the valley like ripples across water, reaching every home, every field, impossible to ignore or dismiss. Then it stopped, and silence fell so complete that even the rain seemed to cease, as if the world itself was holding its breath. And for just an instant, I swear I saw light behind the stained glass window. A yellow glow, weak and trembling like it came from a candle flame fighting against a draft. Through that colored glass I could make out a shadow moving inside, pacing back and forth. A human silhouette going through motions that looked exactly like someone deep in prayer. Someone kneeling and rising, making the sign of the cross, performing rituals that had been performed in that space for over a century. I stood on my porch until the bell fell silent again. Un ableto mobe, unable to look away, transfixed by that impossible sight. When the sound finally ceased, and strange sensation washed over the village, as if part of it breathed with relief, while another part tensed up again, preparing for whatever might come next, whatever this interruption in the silence might herald. The next morning, the sky cleared to brilliant blue, the storm having passed completely. And when someone brave enough climbed partway up the hill with binoculars, they reported that the bell appeared clean, free of rust, polished and gleaming, as if someone had spent the night carefully maintaining it, restoring it to its former glory. Since then, from time to time, the sound reappears, never with the same intensity as before, never as sustained or deliberate, but enough to make people remember, enough to keep that chapter from ever truly closing. And every time someone mentions it, someone older immediately changes the subject, pretends not to hear, or simply says dismissively, "Leave it alone. That's all in the past now." But I know it's not in the past. Not really. Not completely. Because occasionally I dream of Father Augusto. In these dreams, he's always in the same position, kneeling in his cassock, inside the confessional, exactly as they found him. He doesn't speak, doesn't move his lips, just looks at me with those eyes that saw too much, that witness things no human should have to witness. And slowly, deliberately, he raises his burned hands, palms facing me, fingers twisted and blackened, as if he's asking me to listen, to pay attention, to understand something he can't say with words. I always wake from these dreams covered in cold sweat, my heart racing, the image of those ruined hands burned into my mind as clearly as if I'd just seen them in waking life. Remember the last time you felt the presence of something that couldn't be explained? Something that made you question everything you thought you understood about the world. What becomes of us when we carry these experiences? When we know things that contradict everything we've been taught about reality, the weight of it never diminishes, never becomes lighter with time or distance. It remains exactly as heavy as it always was, a burden we carry until we pass it to someone else through stories. Like this, through testimony that says, "This happened, I witnessed it, and whether you believe me or not, the truth of it lives in me and won't let me rest." Express in the comments a personal truth, beginning with, "I feel that, ... Because when we voice what lives in the spaces between certainty and doubt, when we name the feelings that come from encountering the inexplicable, we remind each other that we're not alone in this strange existence. Your truth might be the permission someone else needs to stop pretending they have all the answers. To admit that some experiences leave us forever changed, forever carrying questions that have no comfortable resolution. Com a mesma sensação de estar sendo observado, e quando levanto para beber água, às vezes o vento faz um som metálico lá de longe. O badalar abafado de um sino que não deveria mais funcionar. O tempo passou, e eu já tô velho demais para fingir que isso é só lembrança. Às vezes penso que o padre não morreu tentando salvar ninguém. Talvez tenha apenas aceitado o que estava preso ali. Talvez tenha entendido que havia algo maior do que ele dentro daquele templo e que alguém precisaria ficar para conter. Eu não sei se acredito em maldição, mas sei que a culpa pode se agarrar a um lugar do mesmo jeito que uma raiz se agarra à terra. E se for verdade, o que o padre dizia que aquilo estava ligado ao solo, então nunca foi sobre a moça, foi sobre nós. Sobre o que aconteceu naquele morro, nas gerações que morreram ali, sobre tudo o que a gente deixou de dizer e de confessar. Talvez a última missa nunca tenha terminado. Talvez o padre ainda esteja lá dentro repetindo as mesmas orações, tentando segurar o que não devia ter sido despertado. E o som do sino seja só isso, o eco de uma fé que ficou presa entre o céu e a culpa. Hoje, quando passo pela estrada antiga, tento não olhar para cima, mas às vezes o reflexo do vitral aparece entre as árvores e parece acender sozinho, mesmo sem sol. E naquele instante eu sinto a mesma coisa que senti quando era menino, ouvindo o sino pela primeira vez. Um tipo de arrepio que vem do fundo do peito, como se alguém estivesse rezando bem perto do meu ouvido. Eu nunca contei essa história para ninguém, nem para minha família, mas achei que escrevendo aqui, talvez eu conseguisse deixá-la um pouco mais longe de mim, porque desde aquele dia, ninguém mais conseguiu rezar naquela igreja sem sentir que estava sendo escutado de volta. Se você gosta de histórias assim, inscreva-se no canal e acompanhe os próximos relatos. Não sei muito bem qual é o tamanho certo para isso aqui, nem se faz diferença dizer meu nome, mas imagino que o que importa é o que aconteceu e não quem eu sou. Só resolvi escrever porque tem noites em que continuo acordando como se tivesse alguém comigo. E quanto mais eu tento ignorar, mais parece que aquilo cresce dentro da minha cabeça. Talvez colocar em palavras me ajude a organizar o que ainda não consegui entender direito. Eu fiquei viúva há um pouco mais de um ano. Meu marido e eu moramos por muitos anos na mesma casa. Uma casa simples, térrea, no fim de uma rua calma aqui da cidade. Ele adoeceu devagar, e acho que por isso eu nunca consegui perceber exatamente o momento em que deixei de ter companhia e passei a viver sozinha. My mind gets used to someone's presence, to the sound of them walking around the house, to their weight lying on the bed next to me every night. When the silence truly came, I found this emptiness stranger than the pain itself. After he was gone, I didn't have the courage to move almost anything in the room. His pillow remained in the same place, and the blanket he used was folded at the foot of the bed. It wasn't a conscious decision. It was as if my body was choosing for me. For some reason, that made me feel less lost. I think anyone who has been through this understands what I mean. The first few weeks were difficult. I slept poorly, woke up several times, sometimes with the feeling that someone had whispered my name. So softly to be sure. Show more with that same sensation of being watched, of eyes I can't see tracking my movements through the darkness. And when I get up to drink water, sometimes the wind carries a metallic sound from far away. The muffled tolling of a bell that shouldn't be functioning anymore, that was cut and silenced years ago but refuses to stay silent. Time has passed, and I'm too old now to pretend this is just memory playing tricks. Too tired to maintain the illusion that what happened has faded into harmless nostalgia. Sometimes I think Father Augusto didn't die trying to save anyone at all. Maybe he simply accepted what was trapped there, what had always been there waiting beneath the surface. Maybe he understood that something larger than himself existed within that temple, something that predated the building and would outlast it, and that someone needed to remain as a barrier, a living seal to contain what shouldn't be allowed to spread beyond those woes. I don't know if I believe in curses, not in the traditional sense of hexes and magic, but I know that guilt can attach itself to a place the same way roots burrow into earth, drawing sustenance from soil, becoming inseparable from the ground itself, until you can't tell where one ends and the other begins. And if what the priest said was true, if what afflicted that church was truly connected to the soil itself, then it was never about Livia at all. It was about us, about what happened on that hill over generations, about all the people buried in that cemetery behind the church, about everything we left unsaid and unconfessed, all the sins we committed and then covered with silence and time, thinking they would decompose like bodies, but instead they fermented, grew stronger in the darkness. Maybe that final mass never truly ended. Maybe Father Augusto is still inside right now, repeating the same prayers he was saying when they found him, still trying to hold back what should never have been awakened, performing an eternal vigil that can never cease, or the barrier will fail completely. And maybe the sound of the bell is just that. The echo of faith trapped between heaven and guilt, suspended in a space where neither forgiveness nor damnation can quite reach, where a soul remains bound by duty or punishment or both at once. Today, when I pass along the old road, I try not to look up toward the hill, try to keep my eyes fixed on the path ahead. But sometimes, the reflection of the stained glass appears between the trees, catching light that shouldn't be there, seeming to glow from within, even when there's no sun in the sky. And in that instant, I feel exactly what I felt as a child, hearing that bell for the first time. A kind of trembling that originates deep in my chest, spreading outward through my limbs, like someone is praying very close to my ear, their breath warm against my skin. Their words meant only for me. I never told this story to anyone, not to my family, not to friends, not even to priests who might have understood or offered comfort. But I thought that by writing it here, by putting it into words and sending it out into the world maybe, I could place it a little further from myself, could create some distance between me and these memories that cling like shadows. Because since that day, nobody has been able to pray in that church without feeling like they were being listened to in return, without sensing that whatever resides there is paying attention, is aware of them, is perhaps even answering in ways we can't fully comprehend. If stories like this resonate with you, if they touch something in your own experience of the inexplicable, subscribe to the channel and follow the coming accounts. I don't really know what the proper length is for something like this, or whether it makes any difference to say my name, to identify myself clearly. But I imagine what matters is what happened, not who I am or what credentials I bring to the telling. I only decided to write this because there are nights when I continue waking as if someone is with me, as if I'm not alone in this bed, in this room, in this life. And the more I try to ignore it, to push it away and pretend it's just grief, playing tricks on my mind, the more it seems to grow inside my head, expanding until it crowds out everything else. Maybe putting it into words will help me organize what I still haven't managed to understand properly, will give shape to something that's been formless and terrifying. I became a widow a little over a year ago. My husband and I lived for many years in the same house, a simple single-story place at the end of a quiet street here in the city. The kind of house where you could hear your neighbors' conversations through open windows in summer and where everyone knew everyone's business. He got sick slowly, so gradually, that I never could pinpoint exactly when I stopped having a companion and started living alone, when the person beside me became more absence than presence. The mind accustoms itself to someone's presence, to the sound of another person moving through rooms, to the weight of them settling into bed beside you every night, their breathing becoming the rhythm that lulls you to sleep. When true silence came, when the house held only my own sounds and no one else's, I found the emptiness stranger than the pain itself, more disorienting than grief. After he passed, I couldn't bring myself to change anything in our bedroom. Couldn't face the finality of removing his things or rearranging the space we'd shared. His pillow remained in the same position on his side of the bed, and the blanket he used stayed folded at the foot, waiting for him as if he'd just stepped out and would return any moment. It wasn't a conscious decision. My body chose for me, my hands refusing to move his belongings, my heart not ready to admit he was truly gone. For some reason, leaving everything as it had been made me feel less lost, less adrift in a world that no longer made sense. I think anyone who's experienced this kind of loss understands what I'm trying to say, recognizes this impulse to preserve what can no longer be preserved. The first weeks were difficult in ways I hadn't anticipated. I slept poorly, waking multiple times each night, sometimes with the sensation that someone had spoken my name too quietly for certainty, just loud enough to pull me from sleep, but not loud enough to identify the speaker. How often have you woken in darkness feeling a presence you couldn't see, hearing sounds you couldn't quite identify. What do we do with experiences that live in the space between waking and dreaming, when we're not sure what's real and what our minds have created to cope with loss? Write in the comments, completing the phrase, "I illuminate." Because when we share the light we've found in our darkest moments, when we name what guides us through grief and mystery, we become beacons for others still wandering in shadows. Your light, however small it seems, might be exactly what someone else needs to find their way forward. To understand that even in the deepest darkness, something within us continues to glow. But I always attributed it to exhaustion, to grief, doing what grief does, to a house that had become too large for just one person. All those empty rooms echoing with absence. I told myself this phase would pass, that time would smooth the rough edges of loss until I could sleep peacefully again. And in some ways that phase did pass, the acute rawness of early grief softening into something more manageable. But even as the worst of the morning subsided, certain things continued happening, persisting in ways that couldn't be explained away as simple emotional turbulence. The first time I felt it, clearly, unmistakably, was during an ordinary night that should have been like any other. I'd fallen asleep late, my mind too active to rest easily, and I woke to the very distinct sensation that someone had sat down on the edge of the bed. It wasn't a startle. Wasn't the kind of confused jolt you experience when a dream bleeds into waking. Wasn't something my half-conscious mind invented to bridge the gap between sleep and awareness. It was a real physical change in the mattress. The surface compressed slowly, deliberately, as if it had received actual weight, the springs adjusting to accommodate someone's presence. My first reaction was to assume it was some problem with the bed frame, that maybe the foundation had weakened or shifted, that this was just ordinary wear and tear manifesting in odd ways. I switched on the bedside lamp, flooding the room with harsh yellow light, and looked around carefully. There was nothing, no one, no explanation for what I'd felt so clearly. This repeated itself several more times over the following weeks, always following the same pattern, always unmistakable. I'd be sleeping, consciousness drifting in that peaceful space between dreams, and suddenly the mattress would make that slow sinking movement, depressing gradually, as if someone were sitting down with care and familiarity, always in the exact same spot where my husband used to brace himself before lying down, where his weight had created a permanent impression over years of shared nights. I told myself it was just the impression my mind created, that I was waking in the middle of vivid dreams. My body was confusing memory with reality, filling in sensations that weren't actually there because I wanted them to be. And for a while, that explanation worked well enough. I didn't mention it to anyone, didn't speak these experiences aloud, because saying the words would make them more real, would force me to confront what they might mean, and I wasn't ready for that confrontation. But as the nights accumulated, the sensation evolved beyond just pressure and weight. I began noticing small movements in the blanket, subtle adjustments in the fabric, as if someone were smoothing the sheet with their hand or dragging their palm slowly across the surface, making minor corrections to the bedding, like someone preparing to settle in for the night. One afternoon, in late autumn, as shadows were lengthening and the light turning golden through the windows, I entered the bedroom and was hit by a very specific smell. It was his cologne, that woody scent I'd always associated completely with his presence. The smell that had lived in our closet and on his pillow and in every room he passed through. I hadn't encountered that fragrance anywhere in the house since the funeral, since I'd packed away his clothes and toiletries, unable to face them, but unable to discard them either. In that moment, my legs went weak beneath me, barely able to support my weight. It wasn't fear exactly, it was something else, something deeper and more complicated. It was like my body recognized something before my mind could process it, responding on an instinctual level that bypassed rational thought. I stood there frozen, breathing slowly and deliberately, trying to understand where the scent was coming from, how it could possibly be present after all this time. I opened the window, then closed it again, pressed my face into the sheets and pillowcase, checking every fabric surface for explanation. I found nothing, no source, no reason, no cologne bottle accidentally left behind or clothing that still carried his scent. That same night, the mattress compressed more forcefully than it ever had before. I woke to the movement, and without thinking much about it, without planning the words, I spoke into the darkness. I said quietly, simply, something like, "I miss you." Just that, nothing elaborate or dramatic, no grand declaration or desperate plea. just the first thing that rose to my lips, the truest thing I could say. And the moment those words left my mouth, the mattress sank again, but deeper this time, much deeper, as if someone were leaning toward me, moving closer, responding to what I'd said. That left me speechless, unable to form another sound, my throat closing with emotion and something else I couldn't name. I didn't have the courage to turn on the light, to see what might or might not be there beside me. I remained completely still, barely breathing, waiting for the sensation to pass, for normalcy to reassert itself. When dawn finally arrived, when gray light began filtering through the curtains, I tried to convince myself that sleep had played a trick, that exhaustion and grief had conspired to create an experience that felt real, but wasn't. But I knew, deep in the part of me that can't be fooled, that it hadn't been my imagination at all. After that episode, things shifted in tone and frequency, becoming more pronounced and harder to dismiss. Waking to smell his cologne became a regular occurrence, happening several times each week. Sometimes I'd find his pillows slightly indented, as if someone had rested their head there recently. The depression in the fabric, too deliberate to be accidental. Other times, the window stood open despite being locked the night before, curtains moving in a breeze that shouldn't have had access to the room. Nothing violent, nothing chaotic or threatening, no sense of danger or malevolence. It was more like a constant presence, discreet but clear enough to make me feel accompanied, to fill some of the vast emptiness that had swallowed my life since his death. For a while, I have to admit, this brought me comfort. I know that sounds strange to say. Sounds like something only a person touched by madness would claim. But loneliness weighs on you in ways that only people who've truly lived alone can understand. It's not just the absence of conversation or companionship. It's the feeling that your existence doesn't quite register anymore. That you could disappear and nobody would notice for days or weeks. And even though I had no proof of anything, no evidence I could present to anyone else, it felt like this presence was filling a piece of the silence he'd left behind, making the house feel less like a tomb and more like a home again. But too much comfort sometimes becomes too much confidence, makes you careless, and that's when you lower your guard, when you stop being vigilant about what you're inviting into your life. The worst night happens on a Sunday evening. I remember the day specifically because I'd spent hours working in the backyard, purging weeds and trimming bushes, trying to restore some order to the garden he'd always maintained. I was exhausted in that good way that comes from physical labor, muscles pleasantly sore, and I fell asleep early, which was rare for me. In the deep middle of the night, something woke me suddenly, yanking me from sleep with jarring force. It wasn't a sound, wasn't a noise that penetrated my consciousness. It was the physical sensation of being held, of being touched, of not being alone in that bed. I was lying on my side, curled slightly, and I felt arms encircling me from behind, wrapping around my torso in an embrace. It was firm, heavy, and cold. So cold that even through my nightgown I could feel it like ice against my skin. Breathing struck the back of my neck, slow and deep and deliberate, as if someone were positioned very close to me, their mouth nearly touching my skin, their exhalations washing over me in rhythmic waves. For a few seconds, I tried to convince myself I was still dreaming, that this was just another vivid nightmare born from grief and loneliness. But then I felt fingers pressing slowly into the lower part of my abdomen, tightening gradually as if to confirm their presence, to make absolutely certain I knew they were real, and the panic hit like lightning, sudden and overwhelming, flooding my system with adrenaline. I couldn't move, couldn't break free from whatever was holding me. My body seemed trapped in a horrible mixture of terror and disbelief, paralyzed by the impossibility of what was happening. The breathing against my neck grew stronger, more insistent, each exhalation lasting longer than the one before, until I finally managed to force out a scream. It was a desperate, raw scream, the kind that tears your throat and leaves you hoarse, the kind that comes from the most primal part of your brain when faced with something your conscious mind couldn't process. But nobody heard it. The house was too isolated, the neighbors too far away, or maybe the sound couldn't escape the room where it originated. The sensation of the arms vanished instantly, evaporating as if they'd never existed, as if I'd imagined the entire thing, despite knowing with absolute certainty that I hadn't. I lunged for the lamp, nearly knocking it over in my haste, and flooded the room with light. my hands shaking so badly I could barely manipulate the switch. I cried alone there in that bright, empty room, tears streaming down my face, not knowing what to do, who to call, how to explain what had just happened without sounding completely unhinged. When dawn arrived and soft light replaced the harsh glare of the lamp, the bedroom appeared completely normal. Everything in its proper place, no sign of disturbance or intrusion. The only indication that my experience hadn't been merely a nightmare lay beneath the mattress, hidden where I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't decided to make the bed properly to restore some sense of order to my disrupted world. When I lifted the mattress to smooth the fitted sheet, to tuck the corners properly, I saw something that sent ice through my veins. A cold so profound it seemed to stop my heart mid-beat. There were marks, clear, unmistakable impressions in the fabric and padding. They were handprints, enormous ones, larger than any human hand should be, pressed into the underside of the mattress from below. 5 fingers spread wide, the indentations deep and deliberate, as if someone had gripped the mattress from underneath while simultaneously embracing me from above, as if something had positioned itself beneath the bed and reached up through the springs and padding to hold me. I dropped the mattress immediately, stumbling backward, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. It took several minutes before I could bring myself to approach the bed again, to touch it, to complete the simple task of making it presentable. I didn't take a photograph, didn't call anyone to witness what I'd discovered, because I already knew exactly what they would say. They'd insist I was exhausted, that grief was manifesting in strange ways, that my mind was creating experiences to cope with loss, that I needed to see a therapist, or take medication, or simply give myself more time. But I know what I felt that night. Know it with the same certainty I know my own name. I know the weight pressing against my back, the cold seeping through fabric into skin, the breath moving across my neck like something alive and intentional. I know it wasn't a dream, wasn't imagination, wasn't anything that can be explained away with rational thought or psychological analysis. Since that night, I haven't slept in our bedroom. Haven't even entered it, except when absolutely necessary. I moved to the sofa in the living room, and that's where I spend my nights now, curled under a thin blanket, sleeping lightly, always half alert for something I don't want to name. I still wake in the middle of the night sometimes, with the impression that someone has just passed behind me, that a presence moved through the room while I was sleeping. But nothing has approached the intensity of that night. Nothing has come close to the terror and violation I felt in that embrace. And I've come to understand that no matter how much I miss him, no matter how desperately I want him back, there's a line that shouldn't be crossed between memory and presence, between honoring the dead and inviting something back that should remain at rest. Maybe it wasn't him at all. Maybe none of this has any connection to what I lived with my husband, to the decades we spent building a life together. Maybe it's something else entirely, something that found an opening when I was at my most vulnerable, when grief had stripped away my defenses and left me exposed to things that normally could unreach me. I don't know the truth. Can't see clearly enough through my own confusion and fear to understand what is real and what is ENA. All I know with certainty is that the embrace I felt that night wasn't his. My husband had small hands, delicate fingers that I used to tease him about. Hands that fit perfectly in mine when we walked together. The marks on that mattress, those enormous impressions pressed up from below, weren't made by small hands. They were something else. Something that wore his scent and mimicked his presence, but wasn't him, could never be him. I'm writing this because I have nobody to share it with. Nobody who would understand without thinking I've lost my grip on reality. I don't want to worry my son. Do you want to become the subject of concerned family conversations where they discuss what to do about me? Whether I need medication, or supervision, or institutionalization. I just needed to release this somehow, to put these words into the world, so they're not trapped inside me anymore, festering like an infection. I still haven't had the courage to throw the mattress away, to remove that physical evidence of what happened. Maybe that says more about me than about what occurred that night. Reveals something about my need for proof, for validation that I'm not simply losing my mind in the aftermath of loss. I just want to sleep without feeling like there's someone with me when I close my eyes, without that constant awareness of being watched or accompanied by something I can't see. That's all I want. Just peaceful, ordinary sleep in a room that feels empty because it actually is empty, not because something invisible is choosing to hide itself. If you've listened this far, if these words have resonated with something in your own experience, leave the word presence in the comments, just so I know you stayed until the end, so I know I'm not speaking into complete void. And if you're not subscribed yet, please consider subscribing to the channel. It helps our work tremendously and ensures you won't miss the coming accounts. The other stories of people who've encountered things they can't explain. My wife and I have been married since the beginning of our adult lives, since we were barely more than children ourselves, trying to figure out how to build something lasting. She always dreamed of becoming a mother, talked about it with a certainty and longing that never wavered, while I was always more cautious about these things, slower to commit to such permanent change. But I was never opposed to it, never told her no or tried to discourage her hopes. The problem was that years kept passing and nothing happened. Despite our efforts, despite our hopes, it wasn't lack of trying, it wasn't carelessness or bad timing. It simply didn't come, and nobody could tell us why. When you're dealing with infertility, you start encountering comments and questions and comparisons that wear you down in ways that have nothing to do with medical procedures. Friends get pregnant easily, and you're expected to celebrate while your own failure weighs on you. Family members ask when you're going to have children, as if it's just a matter of deciding, and there's a strange exhaustion that accumulates, heavier than any negative test result, more crushing than any doctor's disappointed face. It was during this difficult period that my mother-in-law mentioned, almost casually over coffee one afternoon, an elderly woman who helped women get pregnant, with special knowledge passed down through generations. She said it the way you might mention an old-fashioned midwife, someone from a time when hospitals were inaccessible and women relied on traditional wisdom to bring children into the world. I didn't pay much attention, dismissed it as superstition, the kind of folk remedy that desperate people turn to when medicine fails them. But my wife latched onto the idea, couldn't let it go. She didn't want to do anything dangerous or foolish. She insisted, she just wanted to talk, to explore every possibility. So we went together, and I held her hand the entire drive there, feeling her hope and anxiety radiating through her skin. The old woman's house sat on a simple street in a neighborhood that had seen better days. But the property was well maintained, the yard tidy, nothing about it suggesting darkness or danger. It was just old, weathered by time but not neglected. The woman opened the door before we could ring the bell, as if she'd been standing there waiting, knowing exactly when we'd arrive. She wasn't friendly, but she wasn't hostile either. She just spoke quietly, carefully, as if conserving her voice for when it truly mattered. She asked my wife to sit, then took her hands gently, examining them like they contained information written in a language only she could read. After a long silence, she announced that my wife's body was prepared, ready for pregnancy, but it needed an impulse. That was the exact word she used. Impulse. As if conception were a car that just needed a push to get started. Then she produced a necklace from somewhere, a chain holding a small amulet that was round and surprisingly heavy, metal that felt cold even in the warm room. She instructed us to wear it together on the night of the full moon. Didn't explain much beyond that, and I didn't ask for elaboration because part of me didn't want to know more. Didn't want to understand what we were agreeing to. My wife, in her fragility and desperation, held that necklace like it was hope made physical, like it contained the answer to years of prayer and disappointment, and I couldn't bring myself to ruin that moment for her. Couldn't be the skeptic who crushed her renewed faith, so I accepted it, nodded my agreement, and we did exactly as the old woman instructed. A few months later, the pregnancy came, and it came in a way that frightened me, even as I celebrated. There were no symptoms at first. None of the usual signs we've been watching for so carefully. We only discovered it because my wife fainted one morning while making breakfast, collapsed without warning onto the kitchen floor. When the test showed positive, she cried with such intensity that I had the impression her weight had literally decreased, as if years of accumulated grief were pouring out of her all at once, leaving her lighter and more vulnerable than I'd ever seen her. Things progressed normally after that. The exams came back fine. Prenatal care proceeded without complications. Doctors smiled and congratulated us, but I couldn't forget about the necklace. Couldn't shake the feeling that we'd made some kind of bargain we didn't fully understand. It stayed in a drawer because my wife felt it should remain there. Felt some intuitive need to keep it close but hidden, and I developed such an uncomfortable feeling about it that one day, without telling her, I threw it away, buried it deep in the trash, and took the bag out. Immediately, so I would be tempted to retrieve it. I can't fully explain why I did that. what motivated me beyond a vague sense of wrongness. I just wanted distance from it, wanted to sever whatever connection it represented. Maybe I feared the symbolism of owing something we couldn't repay. Or maybe it was just paranoia, my rational mind rebelling against the magical thinking we'd embraced. Our son was born healthy, appeared perfect in every measurable way, but he was quiet. Quieter than any baby I'd ever encountered. He didn't cry, not even in the maternity ward when nurses pricked his heel for blood tests, or when hunger should have made him wail for feeding. The medical staff assured us some babies are just naturally calm, that each child has their own temperament from birth, and we believed them, or at least we tried to believe them. Wanted desperately to accept their but his silence created a tension in our home, an absence of sound that felt heavier than noise, as if something essential was missing that should have been present. On his first birthday, something small happened that didn't seem significant at the time. My wife and I simultaneously caught a strong smell, that distinctive odor of a house that's been closed up for too long. Musty and stale, exactly the same smell that had permeated the old woman's home. It passed quickly, vanishing as suddenly as it appeared, and we blamed it on food that had spoiled in the back of the refrigerator or damp towels left in the hamper too long. Anything that made rational sense. The problem was that this repeated itself on every subsequent birthday, always in our son's room, always the same pattern. The smell would materialize from nothing, linger for a few seconds that felt like minutes, then dissipate completely, leaving no trace. I never mentioned it to my wife because I didn't want to see her spiral into panic. Didn't want to be the one who destroyed her joy by suggesting something was wrong. But apparently she was thinking the same thing, maintaining the same protective silence, because she never brought it up either. We'd just look at each other when it happened, and that glance was enough, conveying everything we were afraid to say aloud. On his 5th birthday, everything fell apart. I was putting him to bed, going through our usual routine of stories and songs, when he looked at me with unusual intensity, a focus I'd never seen in his eyes before. It wasn't the gaze of a curious child exploring his world. It was someone choosing their words carefully, preparing to deliver a message they'd been rehearsing. He asked quietly, his voice steady and clear, "Why did you never pay for my arrival?" I froze, every muscle in my body locking up as if I'd been flash frozen. The air felt suddenly heavy, pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I managed to say I didn't know what he was talking about, my voice coming out strangled and false. He continued staring at me, and then his face arranged itself into a small smile. Almost polite. Eerily appropriate for the situation. He said simply she says she's coming to collect. It wasn't threatening, wasn't delivered with malice or anger. It was like he was repeating information someone had given him, passing along a message from a source he didn't fully understand. My wife entered the room at that moment, unaware of the conversation that had just transpired, and asked what was happening, why we both looked so strange. He just turned his face away calmly and said he was sleepy, but he wanted to go to bed now. He seemed composed, too controlled for a 5-year-old who'd just delivered such a disturbing statement. That night stretched endlessly, hours feeling like days as my wife and I lay awake, trying to find explanations, trying to convince each other and ourselves that it was just imagination. Just a child's confused understanding of adult conversations he'd overheard. Children hear things and invent things and mix up fragments of dialogue. We told each other, or what he'd said wasn't a random combination of words, wasn't the kind of confusion a young child would produce. He didn't have the age or experience to connect those particular dots, to form that specific phrase. When morning finally arrived, gray light creeping through the curtains, we found him sleeping on the floor beside his bed, curled on the hardwood instead of in his comfortable mattress. This wasn't normal. He'd always been a good sleeper, stayed where we put him, and around his neck hung the necklace, that same amulet I'd thrown away with my own hands, that I'd watched disappear into the garbage truck weeks ago. I can't describe what I felt in that moment, because it wasn't shock or surprise. It was cold certainty washing through me. Absolute knowledge that none of this was in my head, that something real and terrible was happening to our family. I'm sorry if this sounds exaggerated, if it seems like the kind of story people invent for attention, but there's no way to fabricate something like this. No reason anyone would choose to make up something so specifically horrifying. He was lying there, breathing slowly, peacefully, with that cold metal amulet resting against his small chest, and my wife's eyes met mine, and we both stood there, paralyzed, frozen, staring at nothing, as if our bodies had shut down completely. I don't remember lying down afterward. Don't remember deciding to go back to sleep or losing consciousness. I only remember the sensation of being unable to move, unable to call his name or pick him up or do anything a parent should do. When we finally managed to get up, to force our bodies back into motion, the necklace was gone from around his neck. It had vanished completely, and despite searching every corner of his room, every inch of the house, we've never found it again. I don't know what any of this means. Can't make sense of it no matter how many times I replay these events in my mind. I don't know if there's some rational explanation I'm missing, some logical framework that would make everything fit together in a way that doesn't require believing in things that shouldn't. Exist. All I know is that since that day, the old woman's smell hasn't appeared again, and incredibly, impossibly, it doesn't bring me any comfort at all. It just makes everything more silent, more oppressive. Silent in a way that feels like anticipation, like something waiting to reveal itself. If you use this on the channel, I just ask that you remove my name, keep my identity hidden. I needed to release this burden, needed to tell someone what's happening to us. But even after writing all this, it feels like too much is still trapped inside. Too much remains unsaid because I don't have words adequate to the experience. I don't know if what I'm about to tell you has any logical explanation, any framework that would make it understandable to someone who hasn't lived through it. Maybe it would if I'd sought help back when things first started. If I'd broken the silence and asked someone outside our family to examine what was happening. But things occurred so gradually, changes so incremental, that we adapted without noticing we were adapting. Normalized the abnormal until we couldn't distinguish anymore what was strange and what wasn't. And by the time I realized things had gone too far, had crossed some invisible line into territory we couldn't return from, it was too late to discuss it with anyone in the family without sounding completely insane. We'd always had this habit of gathering for Sunday lunch, a tradition that stretched back as far as I could remember. My father was the one who insisted on it, said it was the only day everyone sat together without rushing, eating what he liked, listening to his stories and opinions, whether we wanted to or not. After Adiad, we continued the custom partly through inertia, partly because abandoning it would feel like abandoning him, like admitting he was truly gone. My mother, who'd always been quieter, more reserved, insisted it would be good to maintain the rhythm for his sake, to honor his memory by keeping his tradition alive. The first few gatherings after the funeral were awkward, weighted with grief nobody knew how to express. His empty chair drew attention constantly. A void at the head of the table that we all pretended not to notice while being completely unable to ignore. No matter how hard we tried to act normal, to fall back into familiar patterns, it always felt like something essential was missing, like we were performing a play with a crucial actor absent. The smell of the food was the first detail that bothered me, the first sign that something wasn't quite right. He had a specific recipe for beef stew that he insisted on preparing every Sunday, a dish he'd perfected over decades of practice, seasoned exactly the way he liked it. But even when we hadn't started cooking yet, when the stove was cold and the pots were empty, the smell would appear powerfully, unmistakably, his version of that dish so distinctive that anyone who'd ever eaten at his table would recognize it immediately. I wasn't the only one who noticed this impossibility. My sister mentioned it on the second Sunday after his death, her voice uncertain, looking around to see if anyone else would confirm what she was experiencing. My mother tried to dismiss it, saying it was just our imagination, grief playing tricks on our senses. But the smell was emanating from the unlit stove, from the empty pot sitting on a coal burner. It was impossible for all of us to be mistaken simultaneously. Impossible for a collective hallucination to be so specific and consistent. Several weeks passed and we stopped commenting on it. Stopped acknowledging the strangeness that had become routine. Life moves forward and we adapt to things. Normalize the abnormal because the alternative is confronting realities we're not prepared to face. But then one Sunday, my sister suggested leaving a plate for him at the table, setting it at his usual spot the way you might leave offerings at a grave. It wasn't meant to attract attention or do anything deliberately supernatural. It was almost an automatic gesture, like lighting a candle during a Seventh-day memorial mass. A way of including him in our gathering even though he was gone. My mother hesitated, her hands hovering over the dishes, clearly torn between honoring his memory and feeling like we were inviting something we shouldn't. But finally, she arranged the plate, filled it with his favorite foods and the portions he would have wanted, and placed it at the head of the table. His chair remained empty, as it always did, but the plate sat there waiting. Throughout lunch, nobody mentioned it directly, but everyone kept glancing at it from the corners of their eyes, watching to see if anything would happen. After maybe 15 or 20 minutes, when we looked again, the plate was empty. Every bit of food had vanished, leaving it as clean as if it had been washed. We laughed because there was a cat in the house, an orange tabby that was always begging for scraps and stealing food when nobody was watching. It seemed obvious, the only rational explanation. But when we got up to clear the table and put things away, the cat was sleeping heavily on the living room sofa, curled into a tight ball, so deeply unconscious it didn't even twitch when we walked past. My mother went pale, all the color draining from her face, but she didn't say anything, didn't voice whatever she was thinking. She just asked quietly that we not repeat that gesture in the following weeks, said she didn't want to disturb memories that way, didn't want to invite the past into the present so deliberately. We respected her wishes, stopped setting the extra plate, but what began happening afterward was much harder to ignore, much more difficult to explain away with logic or coincidence. The food, all of it, started spoiling impossibly fast. Things that should have lasted days in the refrigerator would be yellowed and sour smelling by the next morning, even when sealed in airtight containers. My mother began cooking only what we'd consume that day, because throwing away spoiled food had become routine, an expected waste that made no sense. And every Sunday, without fail, that smell of beef stew would appear before anyone turned on the stove, before any ingredients were even removed from storage. It was a warm smell, rich and savory, exactly like a pot simmering over low heat, except there was no pot, no heat, no logical source for the aroma that filled the kitchen. I tried not to frame it as something paranormal tried to maintain, some grip on rationality, but my stomach would turn whenever I entered that room, some primal part of me recognizing wrongness, even when my conscious mind refused to accept it. The peak of all this occurred on an ordinary Sunday. Nothing about the day suggesting anything special or significant would happen. Lunch was proceeding normally, each of us talking about mundane things, trying to maintain a normalcy that at UNT truly existed for months, but that we all pretended was still intact. I stood up to get a serving dish of rice from the kitchen, a simple task I'd performed hundreds of times. I remember clearly that the light was off, and the window was letting in that particular white brightness of midday sun, harsh and revealing. When I looked toward the kitchen table, my father was sitting in his usual chair at the head. I'm not talking about a shadow or a vague impression or a feeling of presence. It was him, physically him, looking the way I remembered, but wrong. Fundamentally wrong in ways my brain struggled to process. His skin appeared more wrinkled than before, weathered and dried like it had been exposed to harsh sun for too long. His clothes seemed covered in dry dirt, as if he'd decided to sit down for a meal immediately after working in the garden, soil still clinging to his shirt and pants. He was eating slowly, methodically, focused on the plate in front of him, not looking at me initially. I can't explain what I felt in that moment because it wasn't fear, exactly. It wasn't the sharp jolt of being startled. It was more like my body simply shut down for several seconds, all systems going offline, while my mind tried to process information it couldn't integrate. I stood there frozen, holding the serving dish, unable to draw a full breath, unable to move or speak or do anything except stare. After an unmeasurable period of time, seconds or minutes or hours for all I knew, he raised his face slowly and looked directly at me. His eyes were open, fully open, but they held an exhaustion I'd never seen in him during life. A weariness that seemed to go deeper than physical tiredness, that spoke of burdens no living person should carry. He spoke quietly, his voice exactly as I remembered it, carrying that particular tone he used when reminding us of family obligations. "Do UNT be late for the next ones?" The voice was identical, perfectly matching every inflection and timbre I'd heard throughout my childhood. I don't remember making the decision to drop the serving dish. Have no memory of my hands releasing it, but it fell, shattering on the tiled floor with a crash that brought my family running from the dining room. When they burst into the kitchen, faces alarmed and questioning, there was nobody sitting in that chair. It stood empty, exactly as we always left it. No sign that anyone had occupied it moments before. I didn't tell them what I'd seen that day. Couldn't bring myself to speak the words. Maybe I was afraid that saying it aloud would make it more real. would force me to accept that it had actually happened. Maybe I knew my mother couldn't bear to hear it. That knowledge of this would break something in her that was barely holding together. The weeks continued their march forward, and I tried to live normally. Tried to pretend that Sunday had been a hallucination or stress-induced vision. But when the following Sunday approached, I told my family I couldn't make it to lunch, invented some excuse about work or errands that couldn't be postponed. It was a lie, transparent and weak. I just needed distance, needed to not be in that house, near that kitchen, anywhere close to that chair where I'd seen something impossible. They gathered without me, maintaining the tradition despite my absence. And it was on that Sunday, with me deliberately staying away, that the chair I normally occupied sat empty at the table. And once again, mysteriously, inexplicably, a plate of food disappeared without explanation, consumed by something nobody could see or identify. My sister called me later that evening, her voice trembling in a way I'd never heard before, asking if I was all right, if everything was okay. I don't know if she perceived something during that lunch, if she caught a glimpse of what I'd seen, or if she was just frightened by my unexplained absence, disturbed by the pattern of empty chairs and vanishing meals. I only answered that everything was fine, that I'd be there the next Sunday, but that was another lie. I didn't go. Since then, I've avoided every Sunday gathering, made up countless excuses, weathered their questions and hurt feelings, not because I think something specific will happen to me if I attend, not because I fear for my safety in any immediate sense. It is because I have this overwhelming sensation that my father continues sitting in that chair at the head of the table, week after week, waiting for someone, expecting something real him but can't provide. And I don't want to discover who's next, who he's waiting for, what debt needs to be paid to release him from whatever state he's trapped in. Have you considered how the rituals we perform to honor the dead might actually bind them to us instead of setting them free? What if the traditions we maintain out of love become chains that prevent those we via lost from truly resting? The question haunts me every Sunday when my phone rings with another invitation I'll refuse. Every time I imagine that table with its empty chairs and disappearing plates. Every moment I wonder if my absence is protecting me or condemning someone else to take my place. Leave your testimony in the comments beginning with, "I have learned that ... double quotes. Because when we share what death and loss have taught us, when we speak honestly about the boundaries between worlds that sometimes blur in ways we can't explain, we create community among those who carry similar burdens. Your lesson, hard won through grief and fear, might be exactly what someone else needs to understand their own inexplicable experiences, to know they were not alone in walking the thin line between remembering the dead and being haunted by them.